Alex never thought much about inheritance. He lived a quiet life, rented a small place, worked steady hours, and kept his world simple. Money came in, bills went out, and whatever was left usually stayed untouched. He didn't dream big or expect surprises. If someone had asked him what he thought his future looked like, he would have shrugged and said, about the same as now. And he was fine with that. That changed on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The message came while he was at work. Half listening to a conversation he'd heard 100 times before, his phone buzzed once, then again. He ignored it at first. Then he noticed the number. It wasn't saved, but something about it made him pause. He stepped away, answered quietly, and listened. The voice on the other end was calm and formal. It belonged to a legal assistant from a law office several towns away. She asked if he was Alex. When he said yes, she told him there had been a passing in the family. Not someone close. In fact, someone he barely remembered. The name took a moment to land. A relative from his mother's side. Someone older. Someone who had kept to themselves. Alex remembered visiting once as a kid, a long drive, open land, a house that smelled like dust and old books. After that, there had been no calls, no cards, no updates. Life had moved on. The assistant explained that this person had left behind a will, and Alex was named in it. He assumed it was a mistake. People like him didn't end up in wills. At least not ones that mattered. He expected maybe an old watch, some furniture, or nothing at all. He told her as much, awkwardly apologizing for what he assumed was wasted time. That's when she said the words that made him sit down. According to the documents, she said, "You are the sole heir to a land parcel measuring just over 1,000 acres. Ow! Alex laughed. Not because it was funny, but because his brain didn't know what else to do. 1,000 acres didn't mean anything to him. He couldn't picture it. It sounded like something people exaggerated about, like saying they walked 100 miles when they really walked 10 minutes. He asked if she was sure. She was. She explained it slowly, carefully, like someone talking to a person who might faint. The land had been in the family for generations, passed down quietly, rarely discussed. The relative had no children and had chosen Alex because, in their words, he seemed grounded. Grounded. Alex almost laughed again. He spent the rest of the day in a fog. He went through the motions, nodded when spoken to, and drove home without remembering the drive. That night, he sat at his small kitchen table, staring at a printed email the assistant had sent him. Maps, numbers, legal language. It felt heavy and unreal. 1,000 acres. He pulled up an online map and typed in the location at first. It looked like open land. Green patches. Long stretches of earth. Then he zoomed in, and his stomach dropped. There were houses, not a few. Hundreds. Neat rows. Curved streets. Swimming pools. Tennis courts. A large sign at the entrance with a polished name and a slogan about community and pride. The kind of place with strict rules and matching mailboxes and HOA. Alex sat back in his chair. Heart beating faster now. He zoomed in again, then out, then back in. He checked the parcel lines the assistant had included. They overlapped. Not a little. A lot, according to the records. The entire neighborhood sat on land that now belonged to him. He didn't sleep much that night. The next few days passed slowly. He didn't tell anyone, not friends, not coworkers. It felt fragile, like saying it out loud might make it disappear. Instead, he read. He learned words he'd never cared about before. Deeds, surveys, easements. He read old scanned documents with faded stamps and signatures. The story began to form. Decades ago, the land had been mostly empty. The relative had lived far from the main road and didn't pay much attention to the edges of the property. At some point, a developer had come in. Paperwork had been filed. Lines had been drawn. And somehow, quietly, without a real challenge, an entire community had been built. Where it shouldn't have been, the HOA had grown powerful over time, fees, rules, committees, lawyers, and No one had ever checked who truly owned the ground beneath them. Alex felt a strange mix of emotions: shock, fear, disbelief, and something else. Not anger, not excitement. More like pressure. Like standing at the edge of something big and not knowing which way it would fall. He didn't want to cause trouble. He wasn't looking for a fight. But he also couldn't pretend he didn't exist. A week later, he drove out to see it in person. The road stretched long and straight, before curving into something that felt unreal compared to his usual surroundings. Trees lined the entrance. The HOA sign stood tall, freshly painted, with rules listed underneath in smaller letters. Speed limits, parking warnings, security notices. Alex parked off to the side and just sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel. People walked dogs. Kids rode bikes. A maintenance truck rolled by. Everything looked calm, normal, confident. None of them knew who he was. None of them knew that on paper, the land beneath their feet belonged to someone sitting quietly in an old car near the entrance. He stepped out and walked a little. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. He felt invisible, which was strange considering what he now knew. He noticed how carefully the place was controlled. Signs everywhere. Cameras on corners. A sense that rules mattered more than people as he walked. He felt less like an owner and more like a guest who had wandered somewhere he wasn't expected to be. That feeling stayed with him. When he returned home, he called the law office again. He didn't accuse anyone. He didn't demand anything. He simply asked what the next step should be. They advised patience. They advised silence. And most importantly, they advised getting a proper survey done. Alex agreed. The days that followed were filled with waiting. Survey teams moved quietly. Papers were filed. Lines were measured down 2 inches. Alex stayed in the background, going to work, cooking simple meals, trying not to think about the eyes that might turn toward him once the truth came out. He wondered what kind of people lived there. Were they kind? Were they fair? Would they listen if told they were wrong? He didn't know yet. What he did know was this: the land had been his family's long before the first streetlight was installed, and whether he liked it or not, that history now rested on his shoulders. As the first official survey report landed in his inbox, Alex stared at the attachment for a long time. Before opening it, the lines were clear. The truth was solid, and somewhere behind manicured lawns and polished rules, an entire HOA was living on land they did not legally own. They just didn't know it yet, and Alex wasn't sure they were ready to find out. The survey results didn't change Alex's daily life right away, but they changed the way he saw everything. He still woke up early, still went to work, still stood in the same lines at the store. On the outside, nothing was different. On the inside, his thoughts kept circling back to that neighborhood and the people living there, without knowing what the paperwork said. He tried not to think of them as a problem. They were families, not lines on a map. Kids who waited for school buses, older people who watered plants in the morning, couples who argued over small things and laughed at others. Whatever mistake had happened years ago wasn't their fault, but it wasn't his fault either. The law office called again a few days later. The tone was still calm, but more serious now. The survey confirmed everything. The land boundaries were clear. The HOA sat fully inside the inherited property. There was no confusion left to explain away. Alex was asked if he wanted to make contact. He said not yet. He needed time to understand what that contact would mean. Once his name was known, it couldn't be taken back. Once the HOA knew there was an actual person behind the documents, things would change fast. The lawyer agreed. HOA boards moved quickly when they felt threatened. Still, silence couldn't last forever. Alex decided to visit the neighborhood again, this time not just as a quiet observer. He dressed simply, nothing that stood out. He parked closer to the center and walked along the sidewalk like anyone else might. He nodded at people, smiled when they looked his way. Most smiled back. That made it harder. Near the clubhouse, he noticed a small group standing around a table covered in flyers. A banner hung above them talking about community rules and upcoming fees. It looked like some kind of HOA meeting or sign-up day. Alex slowed his steps. A person behind the table noticed him and waved him over with an easy confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from believing you belong everywhere you stand. Are you new here? The person asked. Alex hesitated for half a second, then said, "No, just looking around." The person smiled, but it was the kind of smile that checked boxes instead of welcoming. "This is private property. Residents only beyond this point." Alex looked around at the open space, the wide paths, the lack of gates. "I didn't see a sign. There are rules," the person replied. "They don't need to be on every corner." That sentence stuck with Alex. He nodded, thanked them, and walked away. His heart was beating faster now, not from fear, but from the sharp edge of reality. This was how things worked here. Assumptions first. Authority second. Questions never. On his way back to the car, a security vehicle rolled past slowly. The driver didn't stop, but their eyes followed Alex until he turned the corner that night. Alex sat with the survey maps spread across his table. He traced the lines with his finger. Streets, homes, parks, all sitting inside the boundary. He wondered how the HOA would react if they knew the truth. He didn't have to wonder long. A week later, the first letter arrived. It wasn't addressed to him by name. It was generic. A warning about unauthorized parking inside HOA-controlled space. A fine amount listed at the bottom. Instructions for payment. Alex read it twice. They had his license plate. That meant someone had looked him up. He called the law office the next morning. The lawyer wasn't surprised. "This is how they test people," he said. "They assume compliance. Most people pay and go away." Alex didn't pay. Instead, he sent a short response through his lawyer, stating that he disputed the HOA's authority over the land in question and that further communication should go through legal channels. The reply came fast. This time, it had a name attached to it. A board representative. Polite words, firm tone. They claimed long-standing control of the area, decades of management, and full legal right to enforce rules. They suggested Alex stop trespassing immediately. Alex felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had expected resistance, but not this level of confidence. They truly believed they owned the place. Or maybe they believed belief was enough. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated in small but steady ways. More letters. Notices placed on his car when he visited. Security following him more closely. Once he was stopped and asked to state his business. "I'm walking," he replied. "You can't do that here without permission," the guard said. Alex looked around. "I'm not bothering anyone. That's not how this works." That sentence came up again and again. Alex kept his responses calm. He never raised his voice. Never explained too much. Everything went through his lawyer. Every notice was documented. Every interaction written down. Meanwhile, the HOA board sent messages to residents. Alex didn't see them directly, but he heard about them. Warnings about outsiders. About people trying to take advantage of the community. About staying alert. He wasn't mentioned by name, but he was there. Between the lines, one afternoon, as Alex was leaving, an older resident approached him. The person looked nervous, like they weren't sure if speaking was allowed. "I've seen you around," the resident said quietly. "Are you lost?" Alex shook his head. "No," the resident lowered their voice. "You should be careful. The board doesn't like surprises." Alex thanked them. That short exchange stayed with him longer than the warnings. Not everyone here was blind. Some sensed the tension. Some knew something was off. The lawyer called again with an update. The HOA had hired outside counsel. They were preparing to challenge the survey. They wanted meetings, negotiations. Alex agreed to none of it directly. He wasn't angry, but he was tired. Tired of being treated like he didn't belong on land his family had held for generations. Tired of being watched. Tired of being told rules without proof. Tight. At night, he imagined standing in front of a room full of people, explaining calmly what the documents said. He imagined faces shifting from confidence to confusion to fear. He didn't enjoy that image. He wished there had been a simpler path, but the more pressure the HOA applied, the clearer one thing became. They were not interested in truth. They were interested in control, and control, once challenged, rarely backed down quietly. The final straw came when a notice arrived claiming Alex had violated multiple HOA bylaws and owed a significant fine. The letter ended with a warning about legal action if payment wasn't made. Alex read it slowly, then folded it and set it aside. That evening, he met with his lawyer in person for the first time. They sat across from each other, documents spread out between them. "You're on solid ground," the lawyer said. "But once we move forward, this won't be private anymore." Alex nodded. "I know." "They will fight," the lawyer continued. "Not because they're right, but because they're used to winning." Alex looked down at the maps again. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone." "I know," the lawyer said. "But this isn't about intentions. It's about facts." Alex took a deep breath. "Then let's deal with the facts." The next step was formal notice. And once that notice went out, the quiet balance the HOA had lived under for years was about to break. They still didn't know everything, but they were about to learn that the ground they stood on was not as secure as they believed. The formal notice went out on a quiet morning. Alex didn't see it happen, but he felt it. The kind of feeling that settles in your chest when something permanent has been set in motion. The lawyer sent him a short message saying the documents had been delivered to the HOA board and their legal team. Clear language, clear facts, clear boundaries. From that moment on, nothing felt quiet anymore. Within hours, the HOA reacted. Emails went out to residents. Meetings were scheduled. Cars lined the clubhouse parking lot late into the evening. Alex heard about it from a distance, through updates and secondhand comments, but he could picture it easily. People sitting in rows of folding chairs, arms crossed, voices raised, questions flying faster than answers. Who is this person? What does he want? Can they really take our homes? Alex never wanted to be the center of that storm. But now he was. The first direct call came that same afternoon. The number was unfamiliar, but he knew who it would be. He let it ring twice before answering. The voice on the other end was sharp, but controlled. A board member? They introduced themselves quickly, then moved straight into accusation. "You've caused a lot of confusion," the person said. "This could have been handled quietly." Alex kept his voice calm. "I sent everything through legal channels." "You didn't have to do that," the voice snapped. "We've managed this community for decades." "I understand," Alex replied. "But the land records don't match that." There was a pause, then a change in tone. "What do you want?" Alex hadn't expected that question so soon. He answered honestly. "I want the truth acknowledged." The call ended shortly after. That evening, Alex drove past the neighborhood, but didn't go in. Cars were still coming and going. Lights were on in the clubhouse. A sense of urgency hung in the air, even from the road. The next day, things became personal. Alex's workplace received a call asking for him by name. No message was left. Later, his landlord mentioned someone had asked questions about him. Not threatening. Just curious. Too curious. The lawyer assured him this was common. Pressure tactics. Intimidation without crossing lines. They want you uncomfortable, the lawyer said. They want you to blink. Alex didn't blink, but he did feel it. He stopped visiting the neighborhood alone. Every time he needed to go near the land, someone came with him. Not for protection, but for witnesses. Everything was documented now. Times, places, words spoken. The HOA responded publicly soon after. A statement was sent to residents claiming an outside party was attempting to challenge established boundaries. They insisted the board was confident in their position and asked residents to remain calm. Legal phrases filled the message, but fear sat underneath every line. Alex saw the message through someone else. He noticed his name still wasn't mentioned. That changed soon enough. A week later, A letter arrived addressed directly to him. Not legal this time. Personal. It accused him of greed, of trying to profit from people's homes, of threatening stability. Alex read it once, then again. He felt anger rise, slow and steady. Not sharp. Not explosive. Just heavy. He had never asked for this. He didn't respond. Instead, he focused on preparing. His lawyer gathered historical records, old tax filings, photos, handwritten notes from his relative explaining why the land had been kept whole and untouched. There were even letters warning about developers from years ago. Alex read those letters late at night. They will try to take what isn't theirs, one note said. Not out of need, but because they believe silence means permission. The words felt uncomfortably accurate. As the weeks passed, the neighborhood changed. Security increased. Guards stood at entrances. Visitors were questioned more aggressively. Residents began watching anyone unfamiliar. Curtains moved when cars slowed down. Whispers followed people down sidewalks. Alex noticed the shift even without. Being there, a few residents reached out quietly. Emails sent late at night. Messages that started with apologies. I don't know what's true anymore. They told us you want to force us out. Please tell me what's really happening, Alex responded carefully. He never blamed, never threatened. He explained only what he could prove, that he owned the land, that he wasn't trying to remove anyone overnight, that the situation was complicated, but not heartless. Some replied with relief. Others stopped responding altogether. The HOA board, meanwhile, pushed harder. They filed motions to challenge the survey. They requested delays. They questioned the credibility of records older than their community. They framed Alex as an opportunist who appeared out of nowhere. Alex watched it all unfold with a strange sense of distance, like he was watching someone else's life. One afternoon, his lawyer called with a warning. They're planning something public, he said. A meeting press. They want to control the story. Alex sighed. I don't want attention. I know, the lawyer said, but silence will let them speak for you. Alex agreed to attend the meeting, but only with legal representation. The room was packed. Alex arrived early and sat near the back. He didn't want to stand out, but as soon as people noticed him, heads turned. Conversations paused. Some faces showed anger, others confusion. A few looked tired. The board spoke first. Long explanations. Carefully chosen words. They talked about community values, stability, tradition. They avoided specifics. Then Alex's lawyer spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult anyone. He laid out facts, dates, maps, records. He showed the survey. He explained how the error happened and how it had been ignored. The room grew quiet. Questions came next. Are we going to lose our homes? Someone asked. No, the lawyer replied. Not because of this alone. Murmurs spread. What does he want? Another voice demanded. Alex stood then. Slowly, carefully, he spoke plainly. I didn't build this situation, he said. I didn't hide it either. I'm not here to punish anyone. I just want what's right acknowledged. Some people nodded, others didn't. The meeting ended without resolution. Outside, tension lingered. Small groups formed. Arguments broke out. Alex left quietly, heart pounding. That night, he couldn't sleep. He wondered if he should have walked away earlier, taken a payout. Let the HOA keep pretending, but every time that thought came, it was followed by another. If he did that, the truth would stay buried, and buried truths have a way of causing bigger damage later. The next. Development came faster than expected. The HOA filed a lawsuit. It was aggressive, detailed, expensive. Alex felt the weight of it immediately. Court dates, filings, headlines. His name, finally, out in the open. Friends called. Some supportive, some worried, some asking questions he couldn't answer. Through it all, Alex stayed steady. He reminded himself why he hadn't backed down. Not for money, not for pride, but because ownership meant responsibility, and responsibility meant facing uncomfortable truths. As the legal battle officially began, Alex knew one thing for certain. The quiet days were over, and the outcome would change more than just lines on a map. The lawsuit changed the air around everything. It was no longer just meetings and letters and warnings taped to car windows. Now there were deadlines, court filings, and words written in a language that felt cold and heavy. Alex felt it the moment the papers were served. Not fear exactly, but the weight of knowing there was no turning back. His routine shifted. Mornings started earlier. Nights stretched longer. He learned to read documents slowly, line by line, even when his eyes were tired. He learned which words mattered and which were meant to distract. He learned how often truth got buried under confidence. The HOA's case was loud. It talked about community harm, about disruption, about years of investment and trust. They painted a picture of Alex as someone who appeared suddenly and threatened stability. They talked about fairness, but only from one side. Alex's response was quieter. It focused on facts, old deeds, survey results, tax records, handwritten notes from his relative, proof that the land had never been sold, only ignored, proof that mistakes had been made and then covered by time and silence. Court dates were set. The first hearing was short. It's mostly procedural, but it drained Alex more than he expected. Sitting in that room, listening to strangers talk about his life like it was a puzzle on a table, made everything feel unreal. The HOA's lawyers spoke with confidence. They smiled. They used words like precedent and expectation. Alex's lawyer didn't smile. He spoke plainly. He pointed to documents. He reminded the court that ownership was not based on habit, but on record. The judge listened. No decision was made that day, but something shifted. Alex felt it when he stood to leave. The balance wasn't tilted anymore. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Not many, but enough. Someone called Alex by name. He didn't stop walking. He had never wanted to be known for this. Back at the neighborhood, tension deepened. The HOA sent new messages to residents, urging unity. They warned against speaking to outside parties. They promised the board would protect everyone. Yard signs appeared. It's talking about community rights and standing together. Alex drove past once and saw them lined up neatly. Matching colors, matching words. It reminded him of how rules worked there. Everything organized. Everything controlled. But cracks were showing. Some residents stopped attending meetings. Others argued openly online. A few removed their signs. The fear that had once been vague was now sharp. Emails continued to reach Alex from individuals. Some were angry, some confused, some desperate. What happens to us if they lose? Why didn't anyone tell us sooner? Alex answered when he could. When he didn't know, he said so. He refused to lie to make anyone feel better. The second hearing came faster than expected. This time, witnesses were called. A surveyor explained the measurements in simple terms. A historian spoke about the land's ownership over time. The HOA brought forward longtime board members who spoke about tradition and belief. Belief didn't hold up well under questions. 1. Moment stayed with Alex. A board representative insisted the land had been theirs as long as anyone could remember. The judge leaned forward. Memory is not ownership, he said. That sentence echoed in Alex's mind long after the session ended. Outside, a small group of residents waited. One approached Alex carefully. I was angry at you, the person said. But I don't think you're the problem anymore. Alex nodded. He didn't feel like celebrating. As weeks passed, the pressure shifted. The HOA's tone changed. Less confident, more defensive. They suggested mediation. They floated settlement ideas through lawyers. Offers that would have given Alex money in exchange for silence. He declined. Not because the money wasn't tempting. But because silence was how this problem started. The final hearing arrived on a gray morning. Alex sat quietly as arguments were made one last time. The HOA's lawyers spoke about consequences, about chaos, about what would happen if the court ruled against them. Alex's lawyer spoke about responsibility, about correcting errors instead of burying them, about how power didn't change facts. When it was over, the judge asked for time. Waiting was the hardest part. Days passed, then weeks. Alex went back to work, tried to focus. Every phone call made his heart jump. Then the decision came. The ruling was clear. The land belonged to Alex. The HOA had no legal claim to it. The judge acknowledged the complexity of the situation, the lives involved, the need for a careful path forward. But the facts stood. Alex sat down when he heard the words, not out of relief, out of understanding. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of consequences. The HOA would have to negotiate leases, easements, or changes. The board would be held accountable. The community would need to face a truth it had avoided for decades. Outside the courthouse, there were no cheers, just quiet. Alex drove home alone. He parked. He sat in his car for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel. He felt tired. Not victorious. Not proud, just tired. Because winning didn't mean everyone was okay. It just meant the truth had finally been spoken out loud. The days after the ruling felt strangely quiet. Alex expected noise, anger, celebration, something loud enough to match what had just happened. Instead, there was mostly silence. Emails slowed. News moved on. Life, in many ways, continued as if nothing had changed. But under the surface, everything was different. The HOA board released a statement accepting the decision. The words were formal and careful. They spoke about cooperation and next steps. They did not apologize. They did not explain how things had gone wrong. They simply said they would comply. Some residents believed them. Others did not. Alex stayed away from the neighborhood for a while, not out of fear, but respect. People needed space to process. He knew what it felt like to have your world shift under your feet. Behind the scenes, work began. Lawyers talked. Planners talked. Accountants ran numbers. The question was no longer who owned the land. That was settled. The question was how everyone would move forward. There were options. Long-term. Leases that would allow residents to stay without disruption. Easements for roads and utilities. Adjustments that recognized reality instead of denying it. Alex listened more than he spoke. He insisted on one thing only: transparency. No hidden clauses. No quiet pressure. No deals made in back rooms. Some on the HOA board resisted. Old habits died hard, but the court's ruling had changed the balance. They no longer held all the power. Residents began reaching out again, this time more openly. One message came from a family that had lived there since the early days. They admitted they had trusted the board without question. They had never thought to ask who owned the land. They thanked Alex for not rushing to force anyone out. Another message was less kind. It accused him of ruining dreams and destroying a community. Alex read both with the same attention. He understood the anger. Fear often came out that way. Weeks passed. A plan was finalized. Residents would be allowed to stay. Their homes would not be taken. Fees would change. Rules would change. The HOA would lose much of its control, replaced by agreements that focused on cooperation instead of punishment. Some board members stepped down. New voices emerged. People who had stayed quiet before began speaking up. They asked questions. They challenged decisions. They demanded explanations. The neighborhood slowly changed, not overnight. Not perfectly, but noticeably. Alex returned one afternoon, this time openly. No warnings. No security stops. Just a quiet drive through streets that looked the same but felt different. A few people recognized him. Some nodded. One person waved. Another looked away. That was fine, at the center park. He stopped and sat on a bench. Kids played nearby. Someone laughed. A dog barked. Normal life continuing. He didn't feel like an owner in that moment. He felt like a caretaker. The land had been in his family for generations, but it had never really belonged to one person. It held stories, mistakes, and second chances. He thought about the relative who had left it to him. The quiet choice. The trust. Now he understood why. Months later, the legal work wrapped up. Final documents were signed. The last appeals expired. The HOA, as it once was, no longer existed. In its place was something smaller, less strict, more human. Alex didn't profit the way people expected him to. He could have. Offers had come in. Developers had called. Numbers had been thrown around that made his head spin. He said, no. Not because money was bad, but because this story wasn't about winning. It was about fixing something that had been ignored for too long. He sold small portions of unused land responsibly. He invested in keeping the rest clean and open. Trails were maintained. Access was shared. People adjusted. Life moved forward. Sometimes. Alex thought about how close everything had come to turning ugly. How easily power could have crushed truth. How silence had allowed entitlement to grow. He didn't see himself as a hero, just someone who didn't look away. Years later, when the story came up in conversation, people often asked if he would do it. Again, he usually paused before answering. Then he said, yes, not because it was easy, but because it was right, and because sometimes the most important inheritance isn't land or money. It's the responsibility to speak when no one else does.